Morning, everyone. So good to be here. I just want to get my slides. Okay, so I know, listen, I have to control myself. I've got so much to say that I have to keep myself restricted or I'll talk for 24 hours without stopping. And I get really excited, so I start off calm and then tend to get excited because this stuff is so powerful. When you realize what it means to have a love, power, and a sound mind, it's really, it's just such an incredible gift that God has given us. And so I think a lot of us walk around under the impression that we know we're not supposed to be hopeless, but we feel hopeless. And I'm here to tell you today that you're not hopeless, that you're brilliant, that you're amazing, and you've heard that a million times. But as a scientist, I'm telling you that you've been made in such an amazing way and that you have such potential in you that is really true. Science confirms what we know to be true. So as a cognitive neuroscientist, I'm going to show you the link between science and scripture with what I teach. I've been a believer in God my whole life, and I talk about the concept of godness because God is so huge and so big. And I talk about the concept of science, when I talk about science, I'm talking about God, because science should be in the church, because science comes from the word skuro, which means knowledge, and all knowledge comes from God. So if I don't say one scripture today and I only talk science, I'm still talking God stuff. And I know that might be a bit of a mindset shift for most of us because we think coming to church, there's a certain routine that we follow, or a certain way of speaking. But we need to get beyond that. We need to get beyond into the great, wonderful magnificence of creation and God and what God has given us. And science is a really wonderful, practical way of starting to understand the knowledge of God. So what I often tell people, which helps me to understand things, is that the Bible tells us the story, science tells us how the story works, all coming from the same source. So as a cognitive neuroscientist, I've researched how the mind works and how the mind is separate from the brain, and I've done this for 30 years. I still do research, I still do clinical trials, I still work with teams of doctors, I still lecture, and I do, as Matt mentioned, we spend a lot of time in churches as well. In fact, we travel 70% of the month, so we go home for a holiday now and then, which is a real treat to go home and just to sleep in our own beds. But in the meantime, what is really wonderful is to be able to share globally, we reach millions now with our platform, this message of hope that you have a very powerful mind, that you're not your brain, that your brain doesn't control you, that you're not a victim of your biology, but you are a victor over and above your biology. That is amazing stuff to know that you are not, that the toxic stuff in your life is not your destiny, that you don't have to stay stuck in guilt and shame. All those things that we know we should be doing, science shows us how to do that. So I hope to reveal a little bit of that to you today. It's difficult in the time that I have to tell you everything, so I'm going to touch on some highlights. And today, this first session, I'm going to talk from my new book that was released just a month ago called Think, Learn, Succeed. And this is really accumulation of 30 years of my research into some very practical tools to help people to think properly. Because if you don't think properly, you pretty much, your rest of your life is not going to go the way it should. As we know from the scriptures, if your soul is not well, nothing else will go well. So we need to get our thinking in line with how we designed, and we need to use our thinking in the correct way. So once we can think correctly, we've also got to realize that we need to be able, that we are always learning. When you think, you are always learning. As you are a thinking being, you're a learning being. So 24/7, you're thinking. During the day, you think to build thoughts or to build memories. So during the day, you are learning. When you think to build thoughts, you are learning new information all the time. Whether you're at school or whether you're not at school, you're still exposed to life. You are always learning, and you can control how effective your learning is. And then at night time, you sort out what you have been learning during the course of the day. So when we're sleeping, we go into a kind of housekeeping mode where we sort out what we've been thinking and learning about during the day. And that's kind of part of where dreaming comes from. When dreams are we sorting out all these things in our mind, and our mind is preparing for the next day, and our mind works through our brain, and that's where dreams pretty much come from. So dreams are quite interesting. You can't read your dreams, you can't interpret your dreams. If someone tells you they can, run a mile in the opposite direction or a few more miles in the opposite direction, because dreams are so completely unique to you. What we need to realize is that each of us is so totally different, and how we perceive things is so totally different. So there aren't really patterns that we can identify identify to say, if you dream this, this is where this means this. We've got to be very careful of that, because your two people may dream something similar and it'll have completely different meanings. So in order to think, to learn, to succeed in life, you need to really get in touch with how you think, how you feel, how you choose, how you learn, and get in touch with your mind. And that's really what all my materials essentially teach. So I introduce people to, before I dive into today's talk, just give a broad introduction, first of all, to the concept of the toolbox. And the toolbox is these 4 books that I have up here. I've written plenty of books. I've written 17 books. But these 4 books that are up here, the one called The Perfect You, which I spoke about last night, Think, Learn, Succeed, which I'm going to speak about a little bit today. This one, Switch on Your Brain, some of you might be familiar with, and Think and Eat Yourself Smart. I call that the toolbox of enabling you to use your mind to use your mind effectively, to build your brain effectively, using your mind to detox your mind and your brain, and also to build your body and detox your body. So based on what I've just said, by now maybe you've already gathered this because I've mentioned it a few times, but your mind is not your brain. When we talk about brain, we're not talking about mind. They're two completely separate things. Your brain is part of the physical nature, and your mind is part of your non-physical nature. In science, we talk about the non-physical, and that can be translated in the sort of into Christianese as being your spiritual nature. So when I talk about the non-physical, I'm talking about the spiritual. When I talk about the physical, I'm talking about the brain and the body. And what's very interesting is that the non-physical spiritual part of us is 99% of who we are, and the physical brain and body is only about 1%. The mind works through the brain responds to the mind. So there's some basic principles that help you to understand a lot more about how the mind functions, because if you're not your brain, then that means that you have control over your brain. If you believe you are your brain, then your brain rules you. And if something goes wrong with your brain, well, then that's kind of what you have to live with. Fortunately, that's not the truth. Your brain can change. I did some of the first neuroplasticity research back in the 80s, which is about how the brain can change. And I showed that people with traumatic brain injuries and learning problems, emotional traumas, all kinds of stuff, if you deliberately and intentionally use your mind, you can change the structure of your brain in a positive direction. You're actually changing the structure of your brain right now as I'm speaking. So the words that I'm speaking are sound waves. The images that you're going to see are light waves. These are non-physical waves. They go into your, basically, those enter into your brain. As I'm speaking, and as I'm speaking now, as you're listening to me, as you're watching the things, as you're aware of what's around you, this is generating quantum energy into your brain. Your brain is responding. You get electrical, magnetic, and chemical reactions happening in your brain in response to you listening and thinking about what you're hearing and feeling things about what you're hearing and making choices. So as humans, we are thinking, feeling, and choosing, thinking, feeling, and choosing, thinking, feeling, choosing constantly every few seconds. On a non-conscious level, on a spiritual level, your mind is working at quantum speeds, and quantum speeds are faster than 10 to the 27, which is faster than 400 billion actions per second. So your spiritual part of you, which is the 99% part of you, is incredibly powerful, incredibly fast, has eternal and quantum characteristics, and is working at 400 billion plus actions per second. Now, why am I telling you this? To tell you how amazing you are. Because you're incredible, and you're made in the image of an incredibly powerful God, or I say Godness. And this power that is in us is coming from the source, and the source is God. In Him we live, move, and have our being. So I'm just trying to give you an idea. When we talk about spirit unto spirit, and we read all these things in the Bible, there's a scientific way of understanding this. If your spiritual nature is operating at 400 billion actions per second, and you come from God, can you imagine God's mind? Okay, so we connected with God. So we are designed to be able to connect with Godness. So therefore we have to be brilliant. We have to have exceptional minds, and we have to have exceptionally complex brains to be able to handle the power of our mind moving through our brain. Okay, so when I talk about thinking and learning and succeeding, I'm talking about us really stepping into our potential and doing what we're called to do every day, moment of every day. So based on that, I love to tell people that the research in neuroscience shows us that we are able to deliberately and intentionally control our thinking every 10 seconds. That means 6 times a minute you're supposed to be talking to God about your next thought. How many of you are doing that? How many of you are aware that you can do that? That you can deliberately and intentionally control your thinking, feeling, choosing, and what you're saying and what you're doing 6 times a minute. That is really bringing all thoughts into captivity to Christ Jesus. When we read that scripture or say that scripture, we really think, we like it, renewing of our mind. We love to quote it. I mean, these are always being said, but are you doing it? Are you really capturing every thought? Are you really aligning every thought that you have and every feeling that you have? Because every thought has feelings and it also has which is emotions. Are you aligning that against Godness, against love, against the reality? Are you asking the Spirit of God, should I be thinking this, should I be feeling this, should I be saying this, should I be reacting like that? And that is essentially what bringing all thoughts into captivity means. The average person thinks somewhere between 30,000 and 180,000 thoughts a day. It's probably more, and you're supposed to bring every single one of those into captivity. Okay, so that's quite a challenge. So you're going to have to work hard at that, which means you can't be passive or lazy. You can't just throw out some scripture and pass the buck prayer and expect God to operate like a genie. It means that you're supposed to operate in your intelligence. I'm telling you, you're intelligent. You're brilliant. You're supposed to be thinking things through. We have this misteaching that has gone through the churches for way too long, that if you're intellectual, you're not spiritual. Well, that's completely wrong. To be spiritual, you have to be intellectual. It just depends what you're thinking about, okay, and how you're thinking. So if the book of Proverbs is calling us all the time to get wisdom, to get understanding. You don't get wisdom and understanding by just repeating things or just reacting to things without thinking things through. You're designed to think things through, but what we're designed is to think things through in the God zone, in the love zone. So on this side of the stage where you see the green tree, this is the love zone, this is the fear zone where you see the wiry tree. Two opposite spiritual forces that cannot coexist. The truth is the love zone. This is your default mode. This is where you naturally operate. This is where your positive mindsets, where your reality actually exists. This is the normal, this is the natural, this is the distortion. Now you are a brilliant human being, and you can think, you feel. When you think, you feel, and when you think and feel, you choose. You have free will. I lay before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live. So that means that moment by moment of every day, you are able to assess the situation and you are able to make a choice. Which means that you are able to do what we call in science, go into superposition. You are able to evaluate every 10 seconds what your next choice should be. So that is really renewing of the mind. And that's what I teach in all my materials. Okay, so let's now start this process of getting our minds right and learning how to do this every 10 seconds, etc. Let's start this process by looking at something called the mindsets. But first of all, there is a problem. We have a problem. What is this problem? Is it coming up? Okay, what is this? Is it coming up, Mac? Yes, there we go. Are you thriving? Now, as believers in God, operating in love, with everything on our side, with understanding how to operate, understanding all the principles of God, thinking of good things, pure things, wonderful things, bringing all thoughts into captivity, renewing our mind, do not fear, I can do all things through Christ. All the things we love to say, daughter of the King, made in God's image bearer, all these things. If you are doing that, it means you're thriving. But if you are living in anxiety and depression and worry and bitterness and unforgiveness and irritation and worrying about the next thing and judging and gossiping and etc., then you are not thriving. You are surviving. And this causes brain damage because science shows us that we are designed to thrive, that every single part of our brain and our body is only wired for love. It's called the optimism bias in science. So when we think, feel, and choose, we're supposed to think, feel, and choose in love and make the correct decisions. If we don't, we think, feel, and choose in the opposite direction, in the default mode. We choose to step out of alignment with God, and we wire toxicity into our brain because you literally build physical thoughts. In the second session, I'm going to teach more on that, and you literally cause brain damage. So surviving is generally a mode of I'm getting by, but I'm depressed, anxious, worried, overweight, sick, whatever. Thriving means that I am freaking out in the love zone, which means that I'm actually recognizing that there are issues in my life and issues outside there in the world, but I have hope. I know that the substance and evidence of the possibilities of the future exists. I also know that God is beyond space and time, so I also know that the substance and evidence, let's just say that scripture, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not yet seen. You're hoping for something, you haven't seen it, but it exists. You see, eternity means there is no present, past, and future. God is eternity. God lives in alwaysness. So Godness is alwaysness, which means the substance and evidence of your future exists. So you don't have to beg God for help for tomorrow because your substance and evidence already exists. So what you have to do is get a mindset of thriving, an overall mindset of thriving, which means that I step into the love zone and I step into the fact that the potential of evidence and substance, which is God's wisdom, already exists. I don't beg God for my tomorrow. God's not waiting for tomorrow, next week, next year to solve your problems. When you beg God, you insult God. What you're supposed to be doing is praying and asking God to get wisdom and clarification that you can step into the zone and hear His wisdom. And hear the wisdom of God. It's a different perspective. You will pray differently when you get into this zone because you won't be begging. You will be saying, God, give me the intellect, the power. Let me use my mind to access this wisdom. Help me hear you. It's a different way of functioning because I know the substance and evidence exists in potential form. And as I choose to listen to God, I bring this into my life. And then I start thriving through the issues of life. And there are issues, and if anyone denies issues, well, then you will be all a little crazy to even think that there aren't issues. We all know that there are issues. If you pretend they're not there and you suppress them, they're still there. They don't go away. So saying scripture over something that you don't really believe is going to change is not going to help. That is using God as a genie. God is not a genie. God gives us the ability to deal with our stuff and to step into reality. The model was put out there for us in the Garden of Gethsemane. We know what happened there, but there's another level of things that maybe you haven't thought about. Jesus faced the issue. Jesus modeled the issue. Not only why do we think we see so much in the story of when Jesus was crucified, on the story of him sweating blood in the garden, praying. What was God doing? He was showing us that we need to face our issues. We don't drag our thoughts into captivity. We don't suppress our thoughts into captivity. We don't deny our thoughts into captivity. We acknowledge our issues. We face our Gethsemanes because you will get through them and you will rise again. And the model was placed there. And if you have a look, when Jesus turned to the disciples and they'd fallen asleep and he said, "Can you not just stay awake with me?" Demonstrates another principle in dealing with life. Not only do we need to face our issues, but we need each other. We need the support. Jesus didn't ask them to go to the cross. He just simply said, will you just not be with me? I just need your support. I just need your comfort. And we call that entanglement in quantum physics, the science of entanglement, where we are in relationship. We need each other. You don't fix someone else's problem, but you encourage them by loving them, which increases their resilience so that they are able to face their issues and work through them. And that is what we're supposed to be doing. So if you want to start thriving, you have to shift your mindsets. You have to change how you function. So what I've done in this book is in the first section, I talk about mindsets. In the second section, I talk about how you uniquely think, feel, and choose, and there's a great profile in there. In the third section, I talk about building memory. I'm going to talk a little bit about the third section in the second session today when I talk about the brain. Now I'm going to talk about mindsets, because I have found that when I practiced clinically for 25 years, and now with the work we do going around the globe for the last just about 15 years, we have found that I found collectively, whether it was individually working with a patient, whether it was working with a group of people, or whether it was just dealing with doing what I do now, which is talk all over the place, and I get people sending on emails, what I'm seeing is that there needs to be a number one kind of step to help people get moving into thriving mode. And that is change your mindsets. So what is a mindset? Okay, so the solution. It's all, let's hear the solution of mindsets, okay? Look at this picture. You might have seen this in social media this week. This is Prince William, if you didn't know. And the first one, it looks like he's swearing at someone, throwing a finger. Think, oh, I'm showing swear words in church. But he actually wasn't swearing. Look at that. Look at the bottom picture. This photograph was taken at exactly the same moment. Different perspective. See, he's actually smiling and very friendly and giving 3 points about something. But from the other perspective, it looked like he was angry, irritated, and swearing at someone. It's the same moment. Now, in any one moment, depending on your perspective, you are going to see the current situation in that way. So if you look at the top picture, that's toxic. So that's a toxic perspective, which means that if you put on a toxic perspective, you are going to look at that situation through toxic eyes. And that's going to put your brain into a toxic state, and your mind, which has to work through your brain, is also then toxic. So your mind is toxic, makes your brain toxic, and you set up a toxic feedback loop. And that is causing neurochemical chaos. That's increasing your potential for disease by 75 to 98%. It's increasing your chance of getting some kind of illness in the next 12 months by 43%. It's increasing your chance of getting Alzheimer's by 63%. I mean, is it worth staying in the zone? No, it's not. So it's all about perspective. What is your perspective determined by? It's determined by your mindset. Okay? How you understand and use your mind is predictive of how successful you will be. How you understand and use your mindset is predictive of how successful you will be. Do you think that getting in a toxic zone is going to lead to thriving? Of course not. But do you think that the second picture, getting into the right perspective, seeing this perspective on things versus that perspective, do you think that this is going to lead to thriving? Of course. It doesn't mean the traumas and dramas and whatever of life are going to go away. It just means that you handle them with the right perspective. Okay, so in order to get the correct perspective, perspective means how you see it. Do you see it in a toxic way, or do you see it in a healthy way? Okay, in order to get into that, you need to understand the concept of mindsets. What is your mindset on? What is a mindset? The correct mindsets are integral to success in school, work, and life. They're absolutely integral. It's your very first step. With a correct mindset, you can build your brain. With a correct mindset, you can detox your brain. You see, you use your mind to build your brain. You use your mind to detox your brain. Every single day, you have to build your brain, or your brain will become toxic, and you will get sick, and you will get anxious and depressed, because your brain is designed to be built by your mind on a daily basis. Every day, you need to detox your brain, which means clean up your brain. And if you don't do that, you will have toxic waste in your brain that will also increase mind issues and physical and mental health issues. Okay? So the correct mindsets are absolutely integral. Mindsets help you see the power of your perception. A toxic mindset will help you see that you have a toxic perspective, and a healthy mindset will help you see that you have a healthy perspective. Okay? So what is a mindset? A mindset is an attitude. An attitude is a cluster of thoughts with attached information and emotions. So let's look at this tree over here. Let me explain this. Thoughts look like trees in your brain. Please stay for the second session so that you can understand more about how thoughts form. I'm going to talk about that in the second session. For now, thoughts are real things. They occupy mental real estate like this church occupies physical estate on this property. So your thoughts are real things. They're physical structures in your brain. You build them with your non-physical 99% mind. Your mind in action is your thinking, feeling, and choosing. So when we talk about your mind, or mind in action. It's your thinking, feeling, and choosing. And that is the non-physical spiritual part of you. As you think, feel, and choose, you build stuff. You build thoughts. Thoughts look like trees. These thoughts have got information in them, and they have emotions, because every single thought you build, just due to the nature of how we as humans function, has information and emotions. Okay, so this is a healthy thought with healthy thoughts and emotions. This is a toxic thought with toxic thoughts and emotions. You have no wiring for this in your brain and body, so this causes damage. You have wiring, this is the normal, so this brings health, longevity, etc., etc. So this is a positive mindset, because it is positive information with positive emotions, and so it's generating positive energy. Everything generates energy. Energy is not anything weird. If you don't have energy, you're dead. No lights will work. No cars will work. Your food is fueling your body. So inevitably, there's this thing in the church, you say energy, and someone says, oh, that's new age. Let's kind of get over ourselves and start listening to science and learning about the magnificence of God through science. So don't be frightened by words like energy, because energy comes from God. Okay? And that keeps us alive, and it gives us the wisdom to be able to discover all this technology, etc., etc. Just on a side note. So a mindset is an attitude, and an attitude is therefore made up of thoughts that have information and emotions, and they're generating energy. When you're around someone with a negative mindset, it feels like you sometimes want to go away and have a shower, because there's so much toxicity. You know, when someone's always negative and gossiping and bitter and unforgiving and no gratitude and not happy and always in like a fluster and of rush, etc., etc. And those are all toxic mindsets that are going to bring that toxic perspective on life and generate toxic energy, because we generate a constant stream of energy out of our body, and it's this quantum energy, and our thoughts are contributing to the generation of that energy. So this generates a very toxic wave, and as that wave goes out and it hits you, it turns into a particle. So it's a packet of energy, and as it hits you, it becomes a particle. So you don't feel little bullets hitting you, but you feel that sense of something's wrong. You know, when you walk into a room or you're around people and you just think something's just not right, and you can't put your finger on it. Well, that's the toxic energy coming, and they might be smiling sweetly and saying something, whatever, but you just know something's not right. Okay, that is the power of these thoughts in a certain mindset. So your mindset's like the frame. Think of a picture, and a picture's inside of a frame. And think of the fact that that frame really sets that picture off in a certain tone and a certain light. Something like that. Just give yourself analogies. Okay, so now let's go into this in a little bit more depth. In my research, I've identified 15 different mindsets. And these 15 different mindsets are vital components to being able to thrive in life. These are attitudes that will help you, as I said, build your brain and detox your brain, which I'll talk more about in the second session as well, that brain stuff in the second session. So the easiest way that I have found to teach people mindsets in a limited time is to think of a Christmas tree. Okay, so here's my little Christmas tree. And think of those nets that you put over the Christmas tree, and they've got all those pretty lights on. Okay, or you can put a string of lights, whatever. So now I want you to start imagining with me. And imagination is very, very good for you. You'll see now as I talk about mindsets, the power and importance of imagination. So let's practice that, because as you imagine, you're going to actually be improving your brain health right now as you imagine lights on a Christmas tree. So the first set of lights that I have on my Christmas tree are white. Doesn't really matter what color, I'm just choosing white. And let's say that they're shining this nice, bright, white light. So the first mindset that I'm going to talk about that's shining this bright light is the thinker mindset. What is the thinker mindset? The thinker mindset is the ability that we have as humans to daydream, to let our minds wander, to actually put our phones down. Can you imagine that? Put your phone down, close your computer, get rid of your iPad for a few moments, and sit away from your technology and close your eyes and just imagine. Just daydream. Just let your mind wander. It is so vital for brain function and brain health, and it is so vital for mind function and mind health. Mind wandering, daydreaming, the thinker mindset enables you to learn how to self-regulate every 10 seconds, enables you to learn how to listen to the Spirit of God, teaches you how to step into the love zone and access the substance and evidence that already exists. It enables you to also give your brain the vital rest that your brain needs. Your brain is part of the 1%. Your 99% quantum mind is moving through your brain, moving through the substrate or the substance of your brain constantly all day and all night. So your brain gets really tired. And the connections in your brain can start suffering. So there's all these circuits inside the brain that need to work together across the different structures of the brain. And if you are not giving your brain a rest, then your brain can start breaking down. And you can start feeling anxious and that kind of nagging worry, and that can even lead to feelings of depression, and even lead, if you keep on doing it, you can have a breakdown and you can have a psychotic episode. Now, all these things, schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, these are not diseases like we've been told, we've been lied to. There's no scientific base. I've been in this field for 30 years. These are not diseases. These are mind issues. We are told they're diseases. We are told that they need to be medicated, but that's not the truth. That's a lie from the pit of hell. It really is. And the truth is that depression, anxiety, these are reactions. These are adjectives describing how we function when we are in this zone. So what do we do about them? We deal with our stuff. We face our issues. We start looking at our mindsets. We start looking at all the different elements. What is my mindset? How am I approaching the day? That's the one thing. Am I building my mind? Am I detoxing my mind? In other words, am I getting those chaotic thoughts under control? Am I eating properly? Am I feeding my brain properly? Or am I living on I'm not going to say because I don't do that. Are you living on a diet of junk food? Are you letting chaotic thoughts wander through your mind? Are you doing no exercise? Are you not sleeping properly? Are you constantly in a negative state of mind, etc., etc., etc.? You need to ask yourself those questions, because if you're doing that, you are going to have a reaction in your brain. Your brain can't handle that. It's not designed for that, nor is your mind. So that combination resulting from your choice to not deal with your stuff, not go into the Garden of Gethsemane and face your issues and get through your issues with the support of a loving community. That is what you're designed to do. If you choose not to do that, you're going to go from, even if you're just surviving, eventually you won't survive. As I already said, 75 to 98% of diseases come from our thought life. Our thought life is influencing our genetic expression, which is influencing the physical health of our brain and our body. Diseases come from generation after generation of toxic thinking being passed through the generations, mutations occurring, and diseases form. God didn't make diseases to teach us a lesson. I mean, really. God is goodness, loveness, godness, goodness, perfection. This is thriving. Part of love is giving people the choice to choose love. So if you don't choose love, there's an alternative. And that alternative is there because we choose to distort the truth, not because God made evil. Okay? Evil is the result of us choosing wrong and distorting the truth. So when we have the wrong mindset, we are doing that. We are taking this incredible power that God has given us to think and feel and choose, and we're choosing wrong. So the thinker mindset is a vital component of our daily routine. When you wake up in the morning, choose to say, I am going to have a thinker mindset today. And in this book, I explain the thinker mindset. I give some research and I give activation tips. So for each of the 15 mindsets, there are little activation tips to help you do this during the course of the day. And one of those activation tips for the thinker mindset is to take at least one 15-minute break in your day where you get rid of all technology and you sit there and close your eyes and you just think. You just close your eyes and let your mind wander. You will get an idea of some intrusive thoughts. So if you have a thought that keeps coming up, and keeps coming up, just have a notebook on hand and just make a note and just write that down. I'm saying a notebook. Don't type it in your phone. Write, okay? because then you're going to go and scroll in Instagram or something like that instead of doing your thinker mindset. So if something comes up, and it constantly comes up, at the end of your 15 minutes, quickly before you move on, just write those thoughts down, because intrusive thoughts are very eye-opening. They are showing you something about where your thinking is going. What are your habitual thoughts that are maybe blocking you? Maybe it's a very good intrusive thought. Maybe it's a thought that is constantly coming up, and it's intrusive in a positive sense because it is something that it's almost like these reminders that you should be doing something but you're not quite doing it. Or it's maybe a toxic intrusive thought that's blocking you doing what you're supposed to be doing. So maybe you find yourself always saying something like, oh, I can never get this done, I can never get this done, I can never get this done. And you sit there, and as you just let your mind wander, this keeps popping up. So you start seeing in these mind-wandering moments, you start seeing the issues that you need to detox out of your mind, which are vital because you can't keep them because they're there doing brain damage. They did a very interesting research study where they put 12 from the ages 12 through, it was around about 78, 80 years old, they put these subjects that were all that in that age range into these research labs, and they were in a room where there was nothing except themselves on a chair. And they had to just think for 16 minutes. That was the instruction. Just close your eyes and just think. At the end of the 15 minutes, majority of people hated the exercise. We have reached a time in history where people don't like thinking anymore. We don't like being bored. We want to constantly be occupied with something. Meanwhile, if we don't do that thinker moment, as I said, your brain networks will break down. You're not going to access wisdom. You're going to get foggy thinking. You're going to feel anxiety and nagging worry, which eventually could become depression and so on, and just gets worse and worse. So it's interesting that experiment just 10 years ago revealed different results, where people still like to think. People still like to take the time out to think. So I'm stressing this because one 15-minute activation, mind activation or thinking activation a day is excellent, but if you can do 2 or 3, that's even better. If you can try and train yourself every hour to try and take maybe 3 or 4 minutes where you just close your eyes for a few moments, and just, even if you're staring at your computer or you're in the middle of something, if you can find an appropriate time to, even if you're staring with your eyes open and just staring at something, to take that time just to let your mind wander. It is doing so much for your mental and physical health, and teaching you how to tune into the truth, tune into this zone. Okay, so let's talk. I'm not going to talk about all of the mindsets. Let's talk about the forgiveness mindset. And I've got a couple of notes here as well that I wanted to also just refer to. So let's talk about the forgiveness mindset. We all know about forgiveness from a spiritual standpoint, but in the scientific world, and we draw on quantum physics specifically to explain forgiveness, the importance of forgiveness. What happens is that when something does something to you, so let's say that you've experienced some sort of trauma, so someone's done something to you, it's still an experience, you still process it, you still would have built a toxic memory of that information. And so trauma is then trying to process and deal with this. Now, what we know from the research is that until you disentangle this from the toxic source, it's going to be very difficult to break this down. But once you've disentangled from the toxic source, you can break it down. In the quantum world, there is no present, past, and future. There's also no space and time. So 99% of you as a human being are beyond space and time, which means that there is no space and there is no time in 99% of who you are. Your physical that we can see, that is bound by space and time. So in reality, something happened to you. So here you are now. Maybe it happened 10 years ago, and maybe that person is alive or dead or who knows what, but they're far away. You don't have contact with them. So in the physical, space and time exists. It's far away, but you're still battling. Okay, there's still trauma, you're still having nightmares, it's still impacting your relationships, it's still causing you depression, you're feeling sick, you haven't dealt with it. So what happens in the quantum world is that actually, even though space and time in the physical, they're far away and it's 10 years ago or whatever, in the quantum world, there is no space and time. So it's as though that person is standing right in front of you, doing that, whatever they did to you, over again. And that is why PTSD is a re-experiencing of the whole emotion, the sensations, because the whole memory with all the information and emotions comes back. And if it's toxic and it has a lot of energy, it's going to be very dominant. So whatever you think about the most grows. So if you keep thinking about it and then suppressing it, and then something triggers it and you think about it again, it isn't going away, it's actually getting bigger. And also you're still connected to the source of pain. So like we plug a computer in to charge it, if you're literally having your toxic memory charged by the person or persons who hurt you. So you're still plugged in. So in the quantum world, what you have to do is make a choice, a mind choice, because your mind controls the physical. You make a choice, I am going to forgive. I am going to disentangle. You literally sever that quantum link between you and the person or persons, the perpetrators who hurt you. And now this is sealed off. Okay, it's isolated, it's no longer connected, and now and you're aware of this now, so it's isolated, and because you're aware of it, it's now weakened. So something that's weakened, as soon as you're aware of something, as soon as you bring something into the conscious awareness, it becomes weakened, which means you can change it. When it's in your non-conscious mind, then you can't change it, because you're not aware of it. So that's why we have to bring our thoughts into captivity. We have to bring them, all that's the Christianese you want to use, bring it to the cross, acknowledge your sins and all that stuff. What you're doing is you're bringing this thought into awareness, and as soon as you're aware of it, it's weakened. In the brain, the bonds change, the chemical bonds change, the electrical bonds change, the quantum energy change, and this becomes weaker, so you can start detoxing it and going through a process of detoxing it. Which takes me to the next mindset, which is I'm going to do time, the time mindset. And if you look at the time mindset, what we don't understand, and the reason I want to say it directly after the forgiveness one, is that you may say, I've forgiven that person, but you find that you still have the pain. So then you kind of, well, I must forgive them again, and people get into this guilt, shame, condemnation, and they keep forgiving, but they don't actually know what you're doing. Because you keep, why is the pain still there? I've forgiven. So what happens is that you need to understand time. And so in the physical world, we've got to deal with time. In the quantum world, we don't have to deal with time. But in the physical world, you have to deal with time. So what we know from research is that so we've done the forgiveness, we've isolated this, we're aware of it, but what we know from the research that this is a structure inside your brain. So with your mind, you have to now get rid of this thing, and that takes at least 63 days. Okay? It takes 3 cycles of 21. Your body physically heals in cycles of 21. So whether you have a blister or whether you have a toxic thought, it's going to take cycles of 21 days. In this book, I explain in depth about the detoxing of toxic thoughts and how to do it, and I have an online program. In this book, in the 3rd section, I explain a lot about the 5 steps and the 21 days, etc., in terms of building your brain. Okay, so the time mindset is we need to understand that things take time. We have an instant mentality. Pastor, lay on hands. Lay on hands on me. Let me pray for you. Boom. Okay, it's all gone. Now life begins, but I still feel bad. Well, you've got 63 days that you're going to have to consciously, deliberately, and intentionally step into the love zone, freak out in the love zone. So you're crying, shouting, whatever you're doing, but you have hope because you know that day by day you are breaking this down, breaking this down, breaking this down. That is why I developed the 21-day brain detox for my patients, why I put them through those cycles. As I taught them the mindsets, I taught them how to do this detoxing. I do it every single day of my life. I am always working through a detox. So every year I change about between 5 and 17 things in my life, depending on how long I spend on an issue. That is constant renewing of our mind. That is the constant going from glory to glory or whatever, seeking after perfection as He is perfect. All those scriptures we talk about. This is the practical side. It's not good enough just saying the scriptures, you've got to do them. Okay? You've got to live the life. You've got to live the story that God is telling us to live. So Another thing about the time mindset. So now remember I must refer you back to the lights here. The thinker mindset was the white lights. So I wake up in the morning and I put my thinker mindset on, the white light shining. I'm going to take time to think today for brain health, for accessing wisdom, etc. I'm going to put the next lot of lights on, which is maybe green lights. It's my forgiveness. I know that as I go through the day, I am going to need to forgive people, because guaranteed something today is going to irritate you, or someone today is going to hurt you, and you're going to need to forgive them. So instead of getting all like this, just go into the day knowing I have to forgive. So when someone does, you just forgive. It's so much easier than going here and going through the whole thing and getting frustrated and the whole thing, and then you've got to go and do the whole 63 days because you've been unforgiving for 63 days and whatever. Just go into the day. I'm going to think and access God's wisdom. I'm going to have a forgiveness mindset no matter what. I'm going to realize there's a time issue. Things take time. I'm going to be patient with myself. I'm going to be patient with others. Things take time. In the time mindset, we also need to understand the difference between distractions and being flexible. Okay? So distractions will halt your progress. So as you're moving forward in the love zone, when you see a distraction, you will ignore it. A distraction is taking you off course. If you've got your time mindset on and you've got your forgiveness mindset on and you've got all the other mindsets on, you will recognize a distraction. You will have discernment. Without the thinker mindset, you have no discernment. You are racing through the day like a crazy person, crashing all over the place and wondering why life is so tough and saying the devil's attacking you. The devil is a defeated foe. Please read your Bibles. When Jesus rose from the cross, the evil was defeated. Stop giving a personality to something that doesn't need identity, because you're giving energy and you're growing something that shouldn't have energy given to it. I will not talk about the devil in my life. I will not talk about that. I talk about my ability to choose wrong and to activate evil in my life. Okay, so deactivate it. Don't talk about it. Stop looking for a demon on every doorknob. Stop using it as an excuse. Take responsibility. It's so much easier to say, the devil's attacking me, the devil's this, the devil's that. Please, you are using that as a complete lack of responsibility. You need to recognize, hey, maybe I made some wrong mistakes. Maybe I made some bad choices. Maybe I'm actually a little bitter or irritated or angry, or maybe I'm whatever. I don't know. Find out. Have a thinker mindset. Find out what you may be focusing on that you shouldn't be focusing on, and realize it's going to take time to help you, time to change. But you first have to acknowledge and go through the process. Okay, so you need to understand the difference between distractions and flexibility. You need flexibility. In your love zone, you will have flexibility. You will realize that things don't always go according to plan. So instead of being thrown and freaking out and whatever, you adjust accordingly. But if you're in the thinker mindset, in the love zone, if you're functioning every 10 seconds talking to the Spirit of God, when something doesn't quite work out in the time frame you wanted it to, you can say, okay, God, what do I do now? But if you're over here and you're now totally flummoxed by this change, and then you can't hear God in this zone because you're so blocked, your brain is so foggy from all the neurotransmitters going so crazy because you've made wrong choices, and your mind's like this through your poor brain, and your brain doesn't even know what to do with itself, and you're trying to now deal with this. Now you get stuck and you find yourself frustrated, and you hate your job, and you hate work, and you hate your life, and you hate everything, and you're depressed, and you go and take medication, and you numb your brain, and you feel even worse. And you're causing brain damage at the same time. Please go and read my blogs on mental health and the dangers of psychotropic medication, and in my books as well. So when we talk about time, there is no quick fix. Let's talk about another mindset. Let's talk about the possibilities mindset. Okay, so now I've put on the thinker mindset, I've put on the forgiveness mindset, I've put on the time mindset. So I'm going into life with a very positive attitude. Now I'm going to add the possibilities mindset. The possibilities mindset sees that you're not limiting your potential to preconceived ideas of what the day should be or what success should be. So you wake up in the morning, you've got your plan for the day, and that's what's going to happen, and you go into the day and it doesn't happen. Now, are you going to limit your potential to that preconceived idea, or are you going to be, like the time set, flexible with time? Or are you also going to be flexible with possibilities? Are you aware that God is not limited? God is Godness. God is huge. There are an infinite number of possibilities for that situation. Infinite. There isn't just the one you thought of in the morning when you woke up, or that you thought of yesterday for tomorrow. There are an infinite number of possibilities and solutions for everything. You see, we need to be able to see possibilities in the midst of difficulties. When you see possibilities in the midst of difficulties, you're in this zone. When you see impossibilities in the midst of difficulties, you're in this zone. This is a no going anywhere zone, except unhappiness and depression and all that stuff. This is yes, I get frustrated. Yes, I may even feel a little bit depressed here for a moment, but I always get through it. You've got resurrection power inside of you. In this zone, we don't deny, we acknowledge, but we move through. You see, we see a possibility in the midst of difficulties. Thomas Edison, I love to talk about Thomas Edison. You know, he made, it was like nearly 1,000 attempts before he discovered the light bulb, and he didn't see his attempts as failures. Every single attempt that you make is not a failure. It is a result. So if you've done something and, oh, I've wasted so much time on this, I shouldn't have done this, what a waste of time. That's toxic. That's not going to do anything good for you except make you feel awful. But if you go here and you see, that failure was a result. I can learn something from this. I know now what not to do. I've gained some knowledge that I didn't have a few moments ago. I've got another perspective. It's a learning process. It's what didn't work was as valuable as what did work. That's a possibilities mindset. You see, when you wake up in the morning and you decide, I am going to step in the love zone. I am going to put on the love mindsets. I'm going to think today. I'm going to take at least one 15-minute time today. I'm going to give my brain a chance to rest. I'm going to make sure I find those distracting thoughts, etc. I am going to forgive whoever's going to irritate me today because I know they are going to. I'm going to make sure that I don't expect unrealistic time frames in my life, and I'm going to be flexible. I'm going to see multiple possibilities. Everything I do is not going to be a failure. I'm going to be excited about the new knowledge gained. Can you see the perspective changes? Can you see that picture, if we can just put that picture up of Prince William again, please? Can you see that you, just by your perspective, just by your mindset, you can shift yourself in that moment into one of these two perspectives? You see, mindsets contain power. They contain so much power. The power to propel you forward or the power to hold you back. You choose. Thank you so much.